Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Hat Historian. In this video, I will be talking about a striking military hat that is now most famously associated with the British Royal Guards, the bearskin. The bearskin is a tall hat usually made of, funny enough given the name, bear fur, though in recent years some have also been made with a synthetic substitute, sometimes adorned with plumes or brass plaques. Most famously worn as part of the dress uniforms of the British Foot Guards, particularly when on duty at Buckingham Palace, it has also been used, and continues to be used, by many other countries in some forms. So why do they wear such peculiar furry hats? The bearskin was historically associated with the grenadier units in many armies. As their name implies, these units were trained to attack by throwing grenades. This was a dangerous task, since grenades at the time were primitive and unreliable, being ball-shaped with a small fuse, somewhat resembling those cartoon bombs you see villains throw. These units began to appear in the late 17th century, and at the time military style often included wide-brimmed hats or large tricorns. Grenadiers, in contrast, adopted different hats, with some using small fur-lined caps. But more famously, many started wearing tall pointed hats, notably Prussia, who added an ornamental brass plaque on the front to make it rigid, and whose height was supposed to help them look more impressive. More importantly, these hats lacked a brim which could have gotten in the way of slinging their muskets over the soldiers when running forward and preparing the grenades, or hindered their throwing of them. These Prussian-style hats were sometimes called mitres, due to the resemblance to the hats of Christian bishops, and soon spread along with the creation of grenadier units across Europe, notably in the Germanic states, England, Russia, or Sweden. This style of hat spread throughout the 18th century, with some countries, especially Catholic ones such as France, Austria, Spain, or Portugal, trimming it with fur. The idea of adding fur for decoration as well as warmth to military dress is an old one, with people from the Romans to the Mongols to the Polish doing it. While other kinds were sometimes used, bear fur was liked for its fullness. By the mid-18th century, bearskins developed in Western Europe, with France adopting it in 1761 and Britain in 1768, followed by many other countries around them. These early bearskins looked little like what we now imagine, resembling more the mitres that had preceded them, with a large plaque on the front and a back that swoops down. By this time, grenadiers had essentially stopped using grenades, which were impractical, but retained the name out of tradition. However, the grenadiers became associated with elite units, and being one was a matter of pride. This was because back when they did throw grenades, their range was only however far they could throw them, so generally only the strongest and tallest men were picked, as they could generally toss them further. Additionally, as they could not use their muskets while preparing their grenades, they had to run far within range of the enemy, essentially unarmed, which required great bravery, or at least lack of self-preservation. Thus, grenadier units were generally seen as the tallest, strongest, bravest soldiers in the armies, traits that were retained in recruiting after grenades became obsolete, and their attribute, the bearskin, became the mark of an elite soldier, worn with pride. The bearskin at the time would come in many shapes and sizes, but it took the tall, full shape that we now picture at the turn of the 19th century, with the consular guard, which became, after the crowning of Napoleon, the Garde Impériale. This unit of elite soldiers was given tall, highly ornamented bearskins, which added to the fact that they were generally tall men for the time, made them appear towering, partly adding, I should note, to the myth that Napoleon was a short man. He was about 1.7 meters tall, average for the time, but would have seemed diminutive around these men. Interestingly, in the preceding years, other countries, especially in the German states or Britain, had either abandoned or diminished the use of their bearskins, replacing them with shakos or caps, which were sometimes still fur-trimmed, or reserving them for parade use. It was most famously worn during this period by the Old Guard, considered the best troops in the imperial army, who were the most seasoned soldiers, and were nicknamed the grognards or grumblers, as they were so trusted and respected that they were allowed to complain in the presence of the emperor. Its use by such units only reinforced its status as the headwear of the elite, and a few other countries such as Denmark or Austria used them for units during this time. Now I should take a moment to examine why armies would equip their men with such large, conspicuous, impractical, and sometimes uncomfortable headgear. As I've said in my video on the shako, military tactics and philosophies were different in the age of linear warfare than they are today, with considerations of camouflage being secondary at times when armies would fight in massed units with smoothbore muskets that were not especially accurate, though not as inaccurate as they have sometimes been portrayed. There was an element of psychological warfare used, with commanders wanting to make their men as impressive to the enemy as possible, and bearskins made the men appear much taller and imposing, in the same way as the miters before or the shakos popular during the time. There was also the fact that the power of a country was shown through how ornate and intricate the uniforms they gave their men was, and so equipping them with such expensive hats was a show of wealth and might. Another explanation sometimes given is that it helped confuse the enemy as to where the head was, potentially causing them to miss, though that is less likely as soldiers, then as now, were trained to aim at the center of mass, and even then, the bearskin would not have confused them that much. So, much like the shako, its main purpose was to look impressive, make its wearer seem taller, and specifically for the bearskin, mark him as a member of an elite corps, worth equipping with expensive gear. Made famous during the Napoleonic Wars, the bearskin fell out of use in France with the fall of the Empire, but was then more widely adopted by arguably its most famous wearers today, the British, who at that point had only had select units wear it on parade. At the Battle of Waterloo, the 1st Regiment of Foot Guards had managed to do what none had done before, break the lines of the Old Guard. After their victory, they took many of their opponents' bearskins as trophies, and were then granted the right to wear bearskins themselves as part of their uniforms to replace their shakos. And due to a misunderstanding where leaders thought they had faced the French grenadiers, they were renamed the Grenadier Guards. These early guards' bearskins were rather different from ones they wear now, resembling more their defeated enemies, with brass plaques on the front. In the years following the Napoleonic Wars, a period of relative peace, uniforms became more elaborate, and the bearskin spread throughout European armies. Countries such as Italy, Sweden, or the Netherlands started equipping some of their soldiers with them throughout the 1820s. The British version slowly evolved to resemble its modern iteration, taller and without the front plaque, dyed entirely black, and in 1831 its use was extended to all the foot guards, Grenadier, Coldstream, and Scots. However, by the mid-19th century, its use began to be called into question. Bearskins were heavy, uncomfortable, and expensive, and hard to maintain. The British ceased issuing it to grenadiers outside the foot guard regiments in 1842, and the Netherlands abolished it in 1843. Italy restricted it to specific parade use until getting rid of it altogether. Some other countries, though, held on to them or even revived them. With the establishment of the Second French Empire, Napoleon III, nephew of the first, re-established the Imperial Guard and their bearskins in order to channel the glory of his predecessor. During the Crimean War from 1853 to 1856, the British foot guards went into combat wearing their bearskins, the only time they would ever wear them in the field. Similarly, the French would wear them during the Italian War of Independence in 1859. However, in this latter conflict, so many bearskins were lost in the field, likely discarded by soldiers who didn't want to deal with them, that they were discontinued for field wear. The new realities of war, the expense, and the discomfort that they caused had caught up with the bearskin, and it was retained in various countries only for dress uniforms, replaced in the field with more practical headgear. It should be noted, though, that it remained part of the field uniform for Belgian grenadiers all the way until 1908, long after most had retired it. In 1888, there were even reports that the British might abandon it altogether as a cost-cutting measure, but nothing came of this. With the advent of the 20th century and new kinds of warfare emerging, especially in the wake of World War I, military uniforms became more utilitarian and discreet. Traditional elements, when not abandoned altogether, were relegated to dress and parade uniforms, which often used elements of old traditional outfits. This was the case for the bearskin, which was worn only in the most formal of outfits, in countries that still used it. It was reintroduced after World War II by certain countries that abolished it in the 19th century, as they were trying to re-establish themselves after the conflict, like Italy and the Netherlands, who revived their old designs. While long obsolete as a piece of field equipment, the bearskin continues to be worn by units in many countries as a part of their dress uniform in several different designs. Models resembling the Napoleonic-era ones, with a front plaque and sometimes plumes and cords, are worn by the Dutch Grenadiers and Rifle Guards Regiment, who reintroduced them for the coronation of Queen Juliana in 1948, after abandoning them a century earlier, and by the Grenadiers of the Swedish Life Guards, whose bearskins feature the Swedish coat of arms on the front, and decorative cords. The Italian Grenadieri di Sardinia wear a less full one with a grenade insignia on the front. Different models are worn by units of the Belgian Armed Forces, with the Royal Escort wearing large ones, and smaller ones being worn by the Grenadiers of the Carabiniers Regiment of Prince Baudouin. A large one is worn by the Danish Royal Life Guards when on public guard duty, though recently they have been allowed to wear different headgear in the summer when the bearskin is too hot. When not worn by grenadier or guards regiments, the bearskin can be seen in military bands. It is worn in such circumstances in Kenya, Sri Lanka, Australia, and by drum majors in the bands of the various military branches of the United States. It can also be seen there in some school marching bands. But undoubtedly the most famous wearers of the bearskin are the foot guards of the British Army. Comprised of the Grenadier, Coldstream, Scots, Irish, and Welsh Guards, their iconic black hat, combined with their red tunic, are famous throughout the world, and something of a symbol of the United Kingdom. Each regiment has a distinctive plume on its bearskin to differentiate itself, or lacks one in the case of the Scots Guards. This style of bearskin, along with the red tunic, is also worn, for historic reasons, in Canada by foot and fusilier regiments. Virtually identical to their British equivalents, only the francophone Royal 22e Regiment differ by wearing their cap badge on the front. In recent years, there has been some debate over the material the hats are made of. Traditionally, bearskins were made of animal fur, obviously most often bear, but also sometimes other animals. However, in the latter half of the 20th century, some countries such as Italy or the Netherlands have switched to using synthetic materials, arguing it is cheaper and more sustainable. In the countries that continue to use natural bear fur, such as Denmark, Canada, or the United Kingdom, some animal rights groups have been protesting against using real bear fur for the hats. Opponents of the practice consider it cruel, inefficient, with a single hat needing an entire bear pelt, and expensive, with a bearskin costing between 600 and 700 pounds on average. Those who favor retaining the traditional fur state that synthetics have been tested, but were found less resistant to water and couldn't match the quality and appearance of natural fur. Furthermore, they are made from the pelts of Canadian bears hunted as part of official culling for population control, and using a different material would not stop these animals from being killed. Groups such as PETA have regularly launched campaigns and petitions against the practice, but no change has occurred as of the making of this video, so the debate is still ongoing. A strange hat, once the mark of elite soldiers renowned for their strength and bravery, now a relic in the dress uniforms of certain countries, that add to the appearance of their wearers, even though they can sometimes appear odd in these modern times, bearskins remain proudly worn by the members of the units that have earned them, and seem to be so ingrained in popular culture that they are unlikely to go away. And before you make too much fun of them, remember that their wearers are usually fully trained soldiers, so be careful about angering them. So I hope that you found this video interesting and will join me again soon for another hat. Until then, I tip my hat to you.